Now that we got all the preliminaries completed, we've installed the web server using XAMPP or WAMP, or you have your own hosting service set up and ready to go. What we're going to do in this video is actually write our very first PHP script. We're going to look at some basic PHP rules, and this will create the foundation, and from here we can get into the meat of PHP programming. So the first thing you want to do is open up a text editor, something like Notepad or a simple edit on Mac, or if you have a program like Macromedia Dreamweaver, well, now it's Adobe Dreamweaver, you can use that to write your PHP code. It doesn't really matter what you use as long as you can write text inside of a document. You don't want to use something like Microsoft Word because it will try to auto-format the text. So you want to use something either designed to write HTML or PHP code, or you want to use something very bare bones and simple like Notepad on Windows, or like something like BB Edit on Mac. I'm going to be using Dreamweaver Max 2004 simply because I have it installed here. And it actually makes PHP editing simpler than it might otherwise be because it comes with some built-in PHP buttons that allows me to insert PHP code very easily. But you don't need these to do what we're going to be doing. Actually, you don't need any of this stuff to write PHP code, period. There's actually many PHP programmers out there and programmers of many other languages that prefer to use very simple tools so that they have total control. This is a taste issue. Personally, I think a little automation along the way to help speed up the process in terms of writing your code comes in handy. With all that said, let's start by inserting a block of PHP code. Now I'm just going to click the Insert Code Block button with Dreamweaver and it pops it in for me, but you can just type this by hand. Now, as we covered briefly in another video, PHP code blocks always start with the angled bracket, the question mark, the word PHP, and it closes with the question mark and the angled bracket. You notice that there has to be no space between the question mark and the text PHP. I'll just hit the backspace here. And there should be no space here as well. This has to be touching. But in terms of between this first tag here and this closing tag here, you can have all kinds of space if you like, as long as they're not touching. So you can't have this, but anything like this or like this, it doesn't really matter. It will work fine. Now, this opening and this closing tag here forms what you would call a PHP code block. And basically what that means is that any code, any text that you type in between these tags, the PHP engine will assume that you're writing PHP code. You can think of it like a standard HTML tag. I'll make some room. Whereas we have our body tag, which is opening, and our closing body tag, and anything in between those two tags is interpreted by the browser, which is another type of engine. It's a code processing engine, if you will. It's interpreted by the browser as being HTML code that's going to be displayed in the main page. So same thing goes with the PHP tags, except in this case, what's in between the PHP tags is PHP code as far as the PHP interpreter is concerned. So our next step is to actually write a little bit of PHP. So as we're going along, before I go on, as we're going along, feel free to pause the video and actually type in the code as we go. It's very important when you're learning how to program that you actually follow along and type the code and actually do things. You want to see mistakes happen. You want to get your hands dirty, if you will. It's cool and it's all right if you just want to sit and watch for now, but you're not going to really learn until you do. With having said that, let's actually type in a very simple PHP. I'm just going to save that. Hello world is the classic first thing that you do when you're learning a new language. Every new language does it, so I figured might as well do it here. So let's look at a couple of things with this particular line of code. First thing we should notice is we have the print command here. Now print is a built-in thing. We'll just call it a thing for now. It's actually called a function. It's a built-in tool or mechanism in PHP that basically prints things to the page. So when I say print hello world, I'm telling PHP to print out the text hello world. PHP knows it's text because there's a quote or double quotes around the text. Now, nerds will call text strings. You can think of this as a string of text, because a string of text, because there's one piece of text followed by another, it's strung along. So oftentimes you're going to hear programmers refer to strings. So now you know when they're talking about strings, they're actually talking about text. Now a string could be any length. It could be, actually a string could be just one letter, or it could be pages and pages long. Again, back here we got this built-in function. And again, a function is a thing that is built into PHP that performs an action. And in this case, this function is printing the text, or as nerds would say, the string hello world into a web page. You'll notice a semicolon, which I just highlighted at the end of this line of PHP code. Semicolons in PHP have a very particular meaning. They basically act as a period as far as the PHP engine is concerned. Essentially, when this page gets processed by the PHP engine, it hits this code block, it goes, okay, this is some PHP, and then it continues down and hits and sees the print command. So then it prints out this line of text, and when it sees a semicolon, it knows that this particular command, the print command, is finished. So then it goes on to the next line, and you might have other print commands or all kinds of other functions and all kinds of other things you can do. I just want you to understand that the semicolon acts like a period in the PHP language. It just tells the PHP engine, the interpreter, that this is the end of this particular PHP command. In this case, it's the print command. I know I'm repeating myself many times. I'm doing it on purpose to sort of drill in a point. Another word that people might refer to commands, they would call them statements, as if you're making a statement to the engine. So I'm stating to the engine, print this. So oftentimes in PHP books or when other programmers are talking about things, they'll speak of statements. So now you know what statements are. So let's save this very simple page, and we're going to actually preview this using WAMP or XAMPP, using a web browser, and we're going to actually see what PHP does. Here I've launched Firefox, and you notice I'm at the 127.0.01, which is the localhost address, which is the address, that universal address of my own computer. And I'm in WAMP 5, and since we're here, when you load up WAMP 5 at the localhost address, this is what you call the root because I'm not in any subdirectories. WAMP pulls up this very useful page, and you see here, besides the tools that you can access, you have a list of the projects. Now these are websites that I've created within the WAMP subfolder. Let me jump into that and you'll see what I mean. I just jumped into the Windows file system, and you see I'm in C WAMP. And as I mentioned in a previous video, all our web files should actually go in the www folder. So I'm going to pop that open. You notice all these projects here. Notice PHP work, how to build, killer action script, killer Ajax. These are all killer sites. And what I'm going to do is notice them here. If we go into this project page, you notice it's the same ones, right? So these are all subdirectories or subfolders within the www folder in WAMP. So I'll just click on one, PHP work. Now this is where I actually wrote our particular script, the one we just wrote. You notice we got our root address. You notice the subdirectory, PHP work. And here is our script printing hello world. Let's go back to our actual code. Notice hello world. So let's change this to hello world number 1. So I'll save that. Go back to the web browser. You notice here how it's printed out here. Let's point out a few things. Now let's look at the source, page source. Now here's a couple of things I want you to understand. You notice how hello world number 1 and hello world are all on one line, though in our PHP code it's on 2 lines. This is where you have to draw on your HTML knowledge, and you know that HTML doesn't recognize white space, right? So if we go back in the source code, the PHP code literally just printed out these 2 strings of text, one after the other. And this is how it appears in the HTML. So we're not going to have, in the page display, we're not going to have any breaks. If we actually want to insert a break, we have to insert HTML code and tell PHP to insert HTML code. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So we go back here, we got hello world 1, and what I'm going to do is insert a simple break. Save that, go back to our HTML, boom, we have a break. Let's view the source. Again, it's all on one line, but here's our break tag. So now we're learning that PHP print statement can be used to print normal text and HTML tags. Before I go on to the next part about writing code, I want to point out one other thing. I put a couple spaces here, so I got lots of white space. I'll save that. Again, you'll notice, I'll refresh the page, it doesn't have any impact in terms of how the HTML is displayed or in terms of our page source. It's important that you understand these distinctions as you're starting to write out your PHP code. You'll see how it'll affect things as we go along. So thus far, we've looked at PHP code blocks. We've looked at PHP statements. In this case, we're using the built-in thing, the built-in PHP print function that allows us to print text, normal text and HTML text to the page. What I want to show you now is how we can mix and match HTML and PHP within the page, so it's a lot easier to edit. The reason I say it's a lot easier to edit is because it's not necessarily a great thing to use print commands to print your HTML with the PHP. A lot of times you can mix in PHP with HTML to get the effect you want. Let me show you by an example, and I think it will become very clear. I've modified the PHP code now, so it's simplified. So you notice we got our PHP block here with our print statement here, and we're printing a string of text here. And of course, we've ended with a semicolon because it's the end of the PHP statement. See, we're learning stuff already. So let's create another PHP code block, which I've done very quickly here. And I'm just going to cut and paste this, because cut and paste is good when you're programming, because once you know this is well done and it works, you might as well cut and paste it, so you reduce the chances that you're going to introduce errors. So I'm going to call this Hello World 2. I'm not going to spell it properly because we're pressed for time. But, no we're not, but anyway. So now we got one PHP block of code, another PHP block of code, and in here is just a standard HTML page. So I'm just going to actually put in another break. I'll put in 2 breaks. So what I want to show you here is how we can intermix PHP blocks with HTML. And so I have a PHP block here, another PHP block here, and I can continue onwards. And it will work just fine. I've saved this page. Let's pop open the browser, hit refresh, and here we go. It renders properly. Let's look at the page source. You notice the difference? It looks pretty much the same, and for all practical purposes, we can move on. But I wonder if any of you have picked up on a distinction here. If you remember, when I just had two PHP print statements, one after the other, the text appeared on one line and there was no break. But for some reason now, when I interspersed an HTML, straight HTML, and then I had another PHP statement. So for instance, let me go back rather. This was a PHP statement, this was HTML, and this was another PHP statement. And now we have a space, some white space showing, whereas before we didn't. Let me go back to the code here. Our first PHP statement, HTML, our second PHP statement. And now we have that big space in the actual source code. Oops, let's go back. The space in the source code here, right? The reason for that, let's compare it to before when we had no space, is because we're moving in and out of the engine. So when the page gets processed, by the way, the pages, PHP pages and all HTML pages get processed from the top down. So when this page hits the PHP engine, it starts reading all this stuff, and then it hits some PHP and hits a PHP block and goes, oh, PHP code. So then the PHP code does its stuff, makes its changes. Then it says, oh, it's the end of PHP code. Then it goes back into straight HTML. Then it keeps processing. Oh, more PHP, does its stuff, spits out the results, and then continues downwards. The reason we saw some space between our PHP code this time in the actual source code is because we were moving in and out of engine. So it's like PHP engine, no PHP engine, PHP engine.